A hand exploded across Ethan Cross's face. The crack echoed through cell block C like a gunshot. Metal trays stopped halfway to mouths. Conversations died instantly. Even the guards behind the security glass looked up. No one moved. The giant with the black spider tattoo crawling from his collar to his jaw smiled as though he'd just completed his morning routine.
That's one. See you tomorrow.
A few inmates laughed. Most didn't. They weren't watching the bully. They were watching the new inmate, waiting.
What kind of man just takes that?
Someone muttered.
Scared already? Nah, that wasn't fear.
Ethan's head remained turned for a long second. A thin line of blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, looked at the blood on his knuckles, then quietly picked up his breakfast tray. No threats, no excuses, no revenge. The silence he left behind unsettled the room more than any fight ever could. The man with the spider tattoo smiled to himself. He thought he'd just found the weakest man in Black Ridge maximum security. He was wrong. 48 hours earlier. Cross.
Cross. Ethan Cross. Say it back to me. Ethan Cross.
The intake officer never looked up from the folder. A heavy stamp slammed onto the front page. Convicted felon. Another. Pending appeal. Another. Maximum security. Sign. Ethan picked up the pen. It trembled slightly between his fingers. Not from fear, from the effort of keeping himself from crushing it. The officer slid the paperwork away.
Welcome to Black Ridge.
The words carried no welcome, only finality. 2 days earlier, through the thick visitation glass, Marin pressed both palms against the window.
Promise me something.
What?
No matter what happens in there, don't fight. They'll insult you, push you. They'll do everything they can to make you lose control. Please promise me.
After a long silence, he nodded.
I promise.
She had never known the man Ethan used to be. The man who had once carried 3 wounded soldiers across 400 yards of open enemy fire. She had never learned that the strongest men weren't the quickest to throw a punch. Sometimes, they were the ones strong enough not to. Back in the chow hall, tray in hand, Ethan walked past the tables without slowing. At the end of one table, a bald older inmate watched him without blinking. Beside him, half hidden behind a coffee cup, a younger inmate flinched at the spider tattoo man's voice, as though the sound itself hurt him. Nobody else noticed. Ethan did. He filed it away. That night, long after lights out, Ethan lay awake, listening to the prison breathe around him. At exactly 2 a.m., footsteps stopped outside his cell. Not guards. Too quiet. Whoever it was stood there without speaking. 1 second. 5. 10. 11. Then, the footsteps disappeared into the darkness. Ethan remained motionless, staring at the ceiling. Someone was already watching him, and it wasn't the man with the spider tattoo. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your country or city in the comments. I read every single one. If you're enjoying stories like this, be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. A brand new story drops tomorrow, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Loomis, the bald man said, falling into step in the yard, careful not to look at him directly.
Don't let Tin see you flinch.
Tin. That the one who hit me.
Marcus Adair. Everybody calls him Tin.
He works for a guard named Rourke.
That guard doesn't like inmates comparing notes, so watch how long we talk.
2 men peeled off from the yard fence before Loomis finished the sentence. Not casual. Positioned. Behind you, Ethan said quietly. The first swing came from his blind side. Ethan turned into it instead of away, took the impact on his shoulder instead of his jaw, and drove the man's own momentum sideways into the fence. The second man grabbed for his collar. Ethan redirected the grip, twisted, and put him face down in the dirt without a single closed fist thrown. Guards arrived in under a minute and wrote it up as Ethan attacking two inmates unprovoked. "Rourke's report," Loomis muttered, watching them drag Ethan toward isolation. "Told you, he doesn't like people talking to me." In isolation, alone, Ethan finally let himself feel the shoulder. Bruised, not broken. He'd had worse in the first 10 minutes of missions that ended better than this day had. Through the wall vent, a whisper. "Hey." Young, scared. "The kid from the cafeteria. They put me in isolation too. For nothing. I get scared when things happen fast. They think that's funny." "What's your name?" "Danny." "Stay quiet, Danny. Quiet gets you through days like this. Doesn't feel like it's working for you." Ethan almost smiled in the dark. "No, not today." 3 days later, back in general population, Rourke found him during laundry duty. "Heard you put 2 of Tin's guys in the dirt without breaking a sweat." Rourke's voice stayed pleasant, unhurried. "Military. Rescue missions. Real hero stuff. Doesn't mean a thing in here. I didn't start it. Didn't say you did." Rourke smiled. "Just making sure you understand. Every time Tin tests you, and you put your hands on anybody, I write the report." Appeal turns to ash. "That's not a threat, Cross. That's just how this place works." He walked away smiling. The smile of a man who thought he'd just explained the rules to someone who didn't already understand rules better than he did. That night, a folded note appeared under Ethan's pillow. "Camera 6, East Corridor, has been dead for 8 months. Ask why nobody's fixed it." He didn't sleep. Instead, he mapped the block from memory. Sight lines, blind corners, shift changes, the way he used to map a compound before a breach. At 4 a.m., an alarm tore through the block. Not a drill. Somewhere down the row, a scream cut off hard and fast. By the time guards reached the source, an inmate 2 cells from Danny's had been found unconscious, throat bruised. No witnesses, no camera footage from the one corner of the block where the feed had been down for maintenance since the week Ethan arrived. Loomis found Ethan at breakfast. Ashen. "That's the second man hurt bad in this block since you got here. And both times, the exact same camera's been dark." He lowered his voice further. "That's not coincidence, Cross. That's a pattern somebody's protecting." A week in, and the block had started calling him quiet. Not with respect yet, with curiosity. Ethan was crossing the yard when he clocked it. The same shift in the air that used to warn him seconds before an ambush. 2 inmates cornering a smaller one near the equipment shed, blade glinting improvised and crude, ground down from a mess hall spoon. The target was the flinching kid from the cafeteria. Not Danny this time, someone smaller. Ethan didn't think. He crossed the distance in 4 strides, caught the blade hand at the wrist before the strike landed, and used the attacker's own weight to put him on the ground, controlled. No punch thrown, joint locked, just short of breaking. The second attacker hesitated. That hesitation was enough. "Walk away," Ethan said. "Quiet. Absolute." They walked. The smaller inmate stood frozen for several seconds, still trying to process how close he'd come to dying. Before he could speak, an older inmate who had witnessed the whole thing stepped forward. "Name's Samuel Pruitt," he said, talking too fast. "Nobody's stopped anybody for anybody in here in years. Why'd you do that?" Ethan looked from Pruitt to the shaken young inmate. "Because nobody else was going to." Word moved through the yard faster than any guard's report. By evening, 3 separate inmates who'd never spoken to Ethan nodded at him in the chow line. Small, almost nothing. It was the first currency he'd earned since intake that Rourke couldn't take away with a signature. Rourke noticed too. That night, in his office, he stared at the shift log with real irritation for the first time. "He's building allies," Rourke said to the man beside him. Tin, arms crossed, saying nothing, jaw tight, in a way that had nothing to do with the fight he'd lost days earlier. That's a problem. Man like that gets popular. My leverage gets thin. So push harder, Tin said flatly. Working on it. The lockdown siren hit without warning at noon. Full block, doors sealed, guards moving fast enough that even the guards looked uneasy. Real lockdown, Loomis said through the vent, voice tight. Something's happening upstairs they don't want the block to see. 20 minutes later, cell doors unlocked in a stuttering wrong pattern. 3 cells at once, then silence, then 2 more. A malfunction, or something dressed up to look like one. Ethan's door was one of the ones that opened. So was Tin's. They met in the corridor between blocks, alone, no cameras, the same dead zone from the note. Tin didn't posture this time. He looked almost sick. You know what today is, Tin said. No. 6 years ago today, my brother died in this exact block. Official report said he slipped in the shower. Tin's voice cracked on the last word, fast, like he hated it happening. I was 17. They wouldn't even let me see the body before they cremated him. Rourke wrote that report. Ethan went very still. You've known this whole time. I've worked for him this whole time, Tin said bitterly. Best way to survive a man like Rourke is to be useful to him. I told myself that was enough. He looked at Ethan with something that wasn't hatred anymore. You're the first person since who's made him nervous. Before Ethan could answer, the alarm changed pitch. A different siren. One Loomis had warned him meant only one thing. Riot. The block broke open like a dam giving way. Inmates pouring from cells that shouldn't have opened. 2 rival factions colliding in the common area within seconds. Guards retreating rather than engaging. Ethan moved against the current, toward the isolation wing, because that's where Danny was, and where Pruitt had been moved after the shed incident. A chair came out of nowhere, aimed at his skull. He ducked under it, drove his shoulder into the thrower's chest, controlled the fall. No time to check if it was excessive, only time to keep moving. He found Rourke pinned against a wall by 2 inmates from the block's other gang, outnumbered, baton knocked away, blood on his lip. Ethan hesitated exactly 1 second, long enough to remember every humiliation Rourke had engineered against him. Then he waded in anyway, pulling one attacker off by the collar, absorbing a fist meant for Rourke's jaw on his own forearm instead, and put both men down without breaking anything that couldn't heal. Rourke stared at him, chest heaving, disbelief plain on his face. Why? Because I don't fight for revenge, Ethan said. You should remember that next time you write a report about me. Loomis found him 20 minutes later, block finally under control. National Guard issue riot teams flooding the corridors. You saved Rourke, Loomis said, incredulous. I saved a man from getting stomped to death. Rourke's the part I'm still deciding what to do about. Loomis's face changed. Danny's not in isolation anymore. Pruitt says he saw 2 of Tin's old crew drag him out during the chaos, before lockdown finished. Nobody's seen him since. Ethan's stomach went cold in a way no fight had managed yet. Danny's terror, in the only way he'd ever be able to describe it later. Darkness, a hand over his mouth, being half carried, half dragged through a service corridor that smelled like bleach and rust. A voice above him saying, "Quiet, quiet, this'll be over fast." Like that was supposed to help. They left him zip-tied to a pipe in the old laundry room, alone, lights dead, waiting for someone who never explained what he was waiting for. Ethan found the laundry room 40 minutes later, guided by Pruitt's description, and a hunch built on nothing but knowing exactly where Rourke's dead camera pattern would lead a man who wanted privacy. Danny's face when the door opened, pure animal relief, the kind that didn't need words. "Easy," Ethan said, cutting the zip ties with a shard of glass he'd carried the length of 3 corridors for exactly this. "I've got you. They said it wasn't about me," Danny managed, shaking. "Said it was a message. For you." Behind Ethan, the door he'd come through swung shut on its own, the lock engaging with a sound too clean to be an accident. Tin's voice came through the wall. Low, urgent, not gloating. Cross, don't move. It's not me. I came to warn you, not trap you. But there's people in the corridor outside right now who aren't here for Danny. The lights died a second later. Full block outage, not the localized one Ethan had mapped from memory. 2 men came through the far door in the dark. Methodical, professional, in a way none of the yard's usual violence ever was. Not inmates settling a score. Something colder. Ethan pushed Danny behind a fallen laundry cart. Stay down. Whatever happens, stay down. What followed was the ugliest 11 seconds of Ethan's life since Clear River. He took a hit across the ribs he didn't see coming, pain white and total, and used the momentum of the blow to drop low and sweep the nearest attacker's legs out, controlling the fall enough to avoid killing him, but not enough to avoid a crack that meant a broken wrist. The second man came in with a length of pipe. Ethan caught it on his forearm, felt something in the bone protest, and drove an elbow into the man's throat hard enough to end it. He went down to one knee after, ribs screaming, forearm already swelling. The door burst open. Real guards this time, real lights, and Tin, standing in the frame having pulled the fire alarm 2 corridors down to force the response. You came back, Ethan said, breathing hard. Wasn't gonna let Rourke bury another kid in this block, Tin said. Not after my brother. Ethan spent 2 days in the infirmary. 2 cracked ribs, a hairline fracture in his forearm, injuries that made walking to the yard the next week feel like relearning a language. Camille visited on day 2, angrier than he'd ever seen her. 2 professional attackers inside a state facility, Ethan. That's not gang violence. That's contracted. Rourke doesn't have the money for men like that. She set a folder down, thinner than before, more careful. I'm not chasing shell companies and defense contractors yet. I'm chasing who paid for 2 men to walk into this block during a riot Rourke conveniently didn't stop in time. 1 threat at a time. Start with the riot, Ethan said. Somebody engineered those doors opening in a pattern. That's not a malfunction. Loomis brought different news that night, voice low through the vent. Tin's talking, really talking. Told Internal Affairs his brother's shower accident report doesn't match the infirmary log from 6 years ago. A log Rourke happened to personally file. He's risking everything doing that. He already lost everything, Loomis said. Difference now is he's decided to lose it on his own terms instead of Rourke's. 2 floors up, Rourke read Tin's statement transcript alone in his office, hands unsteady for the first time since Ethan's intake. He picked up his phone and dialed a number that didn't appear in any facility directory. We have a problem, he said quietly. It's bigger than Cross now. You went over my head, Rourke said, cornering Tin in the equipment room, voice low and dangerous in a way it had never needed to be before. 6 years I kept you employed instead of buried next to your brother, and this is, you kept me quiet, Tin cut in. And for the first time, he didn't flinch. Not employed. Quiet. There's a difference, and I finally figured out what it costs. Rourke's hand went to his belt. Not a weapon exactly, but close enough that Ethan, watching from the doorway he'd deliberately positioned himself in, stepped forward before it mattered. Touch him, Ethan said. And this isn't a report you write anymore. This is a fight you lose. Rourke looked between them. The inmate he'd built into a weapon now turned witness, and the man he'd spent weeks trying to break now standing in his doorway, healed enough to be dangerous again. For the first time, Rourke looked less like a man in control of a system and more like a man realizing the system he'd built was collapsing under its own weight. You have no idea, Rourke said, backing away, how far this actually goes. I'm not the one who started this. I'm barely the one finishing it. He left without another word. Loomis, watching from the hallway, exhaled slowly. That's the first true thing I've ever heard him say. Ethan looked at Tin. Your brother's case. If it reopens, then maybe it wasn't for nothing, Tin said. Either of us surviving this. Down the block, unnoticed, an unfamiliar face in a maintenance uniform clipped a badge Ethan didn't recognize onto his collar and began walking, unhurried, toward the block Ethan had just started to call something close to survivable. "New maintenance contractor," the guard said, jerking a thumb at the man in gray coveralls checking pipe fittings near the laundry room. "Cameras, wiring, ignore him." Ethan didn't ignore him. The man moved wrong for maintenance, too still between tasks, eyes tracking the block's rhythm instead of the pipes. He never once looked directly at Ethan. That, more than anything, told Ethan he'd already been seen. Work detail put Ethan back in the laundry room an hour later. Alone, no partner assigned. A scheduling error nobody could explain when he asked. He checked the room before he checked the machines. Old habit, newly essential. The gas line behind the industrial dryer had been loosened, not ruptured, not obvious, just enough that a spark from the machine's worn motor would eventually find it. Ethan crouched, traced the fitting with 2 fingers, and understood immediately. Not sabotage meant to be discovered. Sabotage meant to look like exactly the kind of accident that killed men in old facilities every year, and nobody would ever ask why maintenance hadn't caught it first. He shut the dryer down and reported it through Loomis instead of the guards, because the guards were the ones who'd have to explain why maintenance missed it. "That's not Rourke's style," Loomis said grimly, when Ethan described the fitting. "Rourke wants you humiliated, or dead in a way he can control the story on. This is somebody who doesn't care about the story at all." That night, Lights Out came 10 minutes early, without announcement. In the sudden dark, Ethan heard it before he understood it. A scrape against his cell door lock that wasn't the guard's usual key rhythm. He was already off the bunk, back to the wall, weight balanced, when the door swung open 6 silent inches. Nobody there. Just the corridor, empty, and the faint smell of machine oil that didn't belong anywhere near a cell block. Someone had tested the lock, and wanted him to know it. Shower block, 6 a.m. Ethan hadn't wanted the early slot. Rourke had assigned it anyway, the first order he'd given since the equipment room. A message dressed as routine. The water was still running when the lights flickered, once, and the door at the far end clicked shut with the same too clean sound from episode 15 weeks ago in a different building. The sound of an override, not a malfunction. 2 men entered through the steam. Not inmates Ethan recognized. Not Tin's people. Trained the way Priest, the maintenance man's badge had read contractor, security consulting. Loomis had confirmed it by evening. Moved trained. Ethan had no weapon, no clothes, no cover beyond the shower stalls themselves. He used what was there. A metal shower caddy became a deflecting strike against the first attacker's wrist. The slick tile became leverage, dropping the man hard enough to daze him. The second came in low, and Ethan took a fist to the jaw that snapped his head sideways and put stars across his vision before he drove a knee up into the man's ribs and shoved him into the tile wall with everything his body had left. Both men fled the second the door alarm finally caught up to what had already happened. 30 seconds too late to matter, but loud enough to end it. Ethan stood alone in the ruined shower stall, blood running pink down the drain from a split lip, hands shaking for the first time since intake, not from fear of dying, from how close it had actually come. Camille found him in the infirmary an hour later, staring at nothing. 2 more unregistered contractors, she said quietly. Priest is coordinating something bigger than intimidation now, Ethan. This isn't about your appeal anymore. This is about making sure you don't survive long enough to have one. Then they've already decided the cover-up's worth killing for. They decided that a long time ago, Camille said. You're just the first one who's kept surviving it. He didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every sound in the block, a pipe settling, a distant cough, footsteps on the level above, registered as a threat until proven otherwise. The same hypervigilance he remembered from his first week's home after Clear River. Except this time, there was no home to retreat to when it got too loud. At 3 a.m., the sound came again. Not a scrape this time. A key. The door opened fully. Rourke stood in the frame, alone, unarmed, face gray in the low light. Get up, now, quiet. You've spent 5 weeks trying to break me. Why should I trust a word out of your mouth at 3 in the morning? Because Priest's men are in the east stairwell right now, waiting for a guard rotation gap that opens in 90 seconds, Rourke said, voice low and fast. And if you're still in this cell when it does, neither of us gets to explain anything to anybody afterward. Ethan searched his face for the lie and didn't find one, not because Rourke had become trustworthy, but because fear didn't lie the way ambition did. He moved. Rourke led him through a service corridor Ethan had never been shown, both of them moving fast and silent, every doorway a held breath, every corner a held breath, until they reached a locked administrative office, and Rourke shoved him inside. Stay here until shift change. Doors reinforced. It's the one room in this block Priest's men can't get into without setting off an alarm that reaches the state police directly. Rourke was already backing away. I did this because Tin's brother deserved better than what I gave him. And because if you die on my watch after what happened in that riot, I don't get to live with that either. Why are you really doing this, Rourke? Because I'm done being someone's leverage, Rourke said, and disappeared back into the dark. Ethan sat alone in the locked office, heart still hammering, and understood with total clarity that surviving this block had stopped being about restraint or discipline hours ago. It had become, simply, about staying alive until morning. Morning brought no relief. Danny found him at breakfast, pale, tray untouched. They moved me to kitchen duty, Danny said, voice shaking. This morning, no warning. Guy standing next to the walk-in freezer had a badge like the maintenance guys. He didn't say anything, just watched me the whole shift. Ethan's chest went tight. They're not done with the block. They're expanding who they're willing to threaten to get to me. What do I do? Stay near Loomis. Stay near people. Don't ever be alone with anyone you don't already trust. Not for 1 minute. Ethan met his eyes. I mean that literally. 1 minute is all it takes. The kitchen incident came 3 hours later. Not with Danny, but with Pruitt, the inmate Ethan had pulled from the equipment shed weeks earlier, now assigned beside him on the same detail. An industrial slicer, guarded and inspected weekly, malfunctioned exactly once. Exactly when Pruitt's hand was closest to the blade guard, someone had quietly disabled overnight. Ethan's hand closed over Pruitt's wrist, a half-second before the blade would have found it, yanking him back hard enough to bruise, the slicer's motor screaming uselessly at empty air. That wasn't broken, Pruitt said, staring at the guard mechanism, ashen. Somebody took that apart on purpose. They're not targeting you specifically, Ethan said grimly. They're making sure everyone near me learns that standing close to me is dangerous. It's cheaper than killing me outright, and it isolates me faster. It was working. By evening, 3 inmates who'd started nodding to him in the chow line were sitting 3 tables further away. You're being cut off, Loomis said that night, voice tight through the vent. On purpose. Systematically. Priest doesn't need to kill you if he can make sure nobody in this block is close enough to help when he finally decides to. Then I need to force his hand before that finishes happening. That's insane, Cross. You force nothing. You survive. Survival's not a strategy in here anymore, Pete. It's a countdown. Ethan's voice was flat, controlled, and utterly certain. Every day I wait, they isolate me further. I need Kessler back in this block, officially, with enough of a paper trail that killing me stops being clean enough to be worth the risk. He got his chance faster than expected. At final count, a guard he didn't recognize called his number for an unscheduled transfer to the administrative wing. The same wing Rourke had hidden him in 3 nights earlier, except this time, no Rourke was waiting, and the escort's badge number didn't match anyone on the shift roster Loomis had memorized. The corridor lights ahead flickered once, exactly the way they had before Priest's first attempt, and Ethan understood with total, cold clarity that whoever was walking behind him right now had stopped pretending this was about intimidation at all. Keep walking, the escort said quietly, hand resting too casually near his belt. Nice and easy, Cross. Almost there. Ethan didn't ask where there was. He already knew there wasn't a version of that corridor that ended with him walking back out of it, unless he did something about it in the next 10 seconds. Ethan moved on the 9th second, He dropped low and back into the escort's reaching hand, using the man's own grab to pull him off balance, then drove an elbow into his sternum hard enough to fold him. The escort's hand went for his belt, not a baton. A syringe, capped, already primed. Ethan caught the wrist before the needle cleared its sheath and slammed it twice against the corridor wall until the man's fingers opened on reflex. The syringe skittered across the tile, unbroken. Not a clean kill, Ethan said, breathing hard, pinning the man's arm behind his back. You wanted it to look like a heart attack. The man said nothing. He didn't need to. The badge on his collar, when Ethan finally got a look at it under the flickering light, read a name that matched nothing in any roster Loomis had ever memorized, because it wasn't a prison badge at all. A contractor's badge, identical in style to the one Priest had worn weeks earlier. The real alarm hit 40 seconds later, guards flooding the corridor for the second time in a month, and this time there was a syringe on the floor and a stranger in cuffs who wasn't listed as an employee anywhere in the building system. Kessler arrived within the hour, tablet already out, expression grim. Toxicology's rushing that syringe now, but I'll bet you a year's salary it's something that mimics cardiac arrest. Priest doesn't send men to intimidate anymore, Ethan. He sends men to finish it quietly. Then stop protecting me quietly, Ethan said. Every time this stays contained to the block, it stays deniable. I need this loud. Kessler studied him for a long moment. Loud gets you a target on your back from people with a lot more reach than Rourke. I already have that target, Ethan said. I'd rather everyone see who's holding the gun. The captured contractor gave up nothing under formal questioning. Not a name, not an employer, just silence and a lawyer who arrived within 2 hours with a business card that traced, when Kessler ran it that evening, to a firm that had represented Aldergate Capital in 3 prior unrelated matters. First real thread connecting Priest's people directly to Vance's company, Kessler said. Not proof, a thread. Then pull it before they cut it, Ethan said. That threat cut both ways. By the next morning, Rourke's name had been added to a very different kind of target list. Not Ethan's allies being isolated anymore, but Rourke himself, the man who now knew too much and had proven, twice, that his loyalty had shifted. Ethan found him in the equipment room before Tin did, both of them arriving from different directions with the same fear on their faces. They tried to run your car off the frontage road last night on your way home, Tin said, breathless. My cousin works the gate, saw the whole thing on the outer camera before it malfunctioned too. Rourke's hands were shaking. I've spent 5 weeks thinking the worst thing that could happen to me was losing my job over this. I was wrong. Welcome to the block, Ethan said, without much sympathy left to spare. Now you understand exactly what everyone you've hurt in here has been living with. That afternoon, an unscheduled fire drill pulled the entire block into the yard. Routine, until Ethan noticed the drill wasn't on any posted schedule, and the guards running it weren't following standard headcount procedure. They were clearing the block. For something. The explosion came from the laundry wing at 2:47 p.m. Not large, but enough to blow the reinforced door off its hinges and send a column of black smoke rolling up through the stairwell Ethan had used a dozen times in the last 6 weeks. The gas line. The one he'd reported. Someone had finished the job Ethan interrupted, this time timed for the exact hour the block's population would be smallest and slowest to respond. Pruitt was on laundry detail this shift. Loomis shouted over the sirens. So was Danny. They swapped him back on last night without telling anyone. Ethan was already moving before the second alarm finished sounding, cutting against the evacuation current the way he had during the riot, smoke thickening with every step, heat radiating through the corridor walls like something alive. He found Pruitt first, pinned under a collapsed shelving unit, coughing blood-flecked smoke, leg pinned at an angle that made Ethan's stomach turn. He heaved the shelving off with a strength that cost him something in his lower back he'd feel for days, dragged Pruitt clear, and kept moving. Danny was harder to find. The smoke had gone from gray to black, visibility dropping to arm's length. Heat now genuinely dangerous. the kind that started cooking the air itself. "Danny!" His voice cracked from the smoke. "Danny, make noise!" A weak cough, ahead and to the left. Ethan dropped to the floor where the air was marginally clearer and crawled toward it. Found Danny curled against a jammed exit door, half conscious, and used his own body to shield the boy's face while he threw his full weight against the door 3 times before it finally gave. They came out into daylight together, both coughing, both alive, seconds before the ceiling behind them gave way entirely. 6 inmates were treated for smoke inhalation. 2, including Pruitt, were airlifted for burns and a fractured femur. No one died, a fact the fire marshal's preliminary report called remarkable, given the point of origin and the delay in detection. Kessler read that report standing in the ash-streaked yard, jaw tight. Preliminary origin, gas line failure, consistent with age and wear. "It's not wear," Ethan said, voice raw from smoke. "I reported that exact fitting 6 weeks ago. There's a maintenance log with my complaint on it, time-stamped, if anyone bothers to pull it before Meridian's people get to it first. I'll pull it myself, tonight." Kessler's expression had shifted into something harder than grim. "Ethan, this isn't intimidation anymore. This was an attempt to kill a dozen inmates to make sure 2 of them didn't survive the day. That's not deniable. That's not containable. I'm done asking anyone's permission on this." That night, in the temporary housing block set up for displaced inmates, Tin found Ethan sitting alone, staring at bandaged hands he didn't remember burning. "You went back in for Danny," Tin said quietly. "Nobody would have blamed you for getting Pruitt out and stopping there. Somebody already lost a brother in this building because people stopped when it got too dangerous to keep going," Ethan said. "I wasn't going to be the reason it happened again." Tin didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice had none of the bravado left in it from 6 weeks earlier. "I want to testify, fully, on the record, about my brother, about Rourke, about all of it. Not because it fixes anything, because somebody almost died today the same way he did, and I'm done being the reason people like Priest think this block is safe to keep hurting people in." Kessler's raid hit the administrative wing before dawn. Full federal presence this time, Griggs's office sealed, maintenance contracts seized, the fire marshal's report already flagged as an active federal exhibit rather than a routine incident file. Priest was gone, cleared out sometime in the chaos of the fire, his contractor badge deactivated remotely the moment the raid began, as though someone above him had decided he'd become a liability rather than an asset, the instant the fire made this impossible to contain quietly. "He's in the wind," Kessler told Ethan grimly, "which means whoever's funding him just decided you're worth more to them alive and unprovable than dead and investigated. That should scare you more than the fire did. Why? Because it means they still think they can win this the slow way." Griggs, cornered in his own office by agents he could no longer pretend not to recognize, finally said the one thing he'd been avoiding for 6 weeks. "There's a name above Priest," he told Kessler, voice hollow. "I only ever heard it once, in a phone call I wasn't supposed to be listening to. Vance. Holt Vance." Kessler didn't react outwardly, but Ethan, watching from the doorway, saw something shift behind her eyes, the specific stillness of a person finally seeing the shape of the thing they'd been chasing blind for weeks. "We're not done in this prison," she said quietly, more to herself than to either of them. "But I don't think this prison is where it ends anymore either." Outside, the yard was already being cleared for the next head count, smoke damage still staining the laundry wing's outer wall like a scar the building would carry long after Ethan did, assuming he lived long enough to be the one still standing when this finally ended. "Pruitt's stable," Camille said, reading from her phone in the visitation room, "but he's out for the rest of his sentence on medical transfer. Won't be back in this block." "Good," Ethan said. "He's earned being somewhere Priest's people can't reach him." "That's the problem," Camille said, lowering her voice. "Kessler thinks somebody fed Priest the exact minute the block would be lightest for that fire. That's not outside information, Ethan. That's someone inside this facility. Still active, still reporting. Ethan's jaw tightened. 6 weeks of learning every blind spot, every camera pattern, every shift change, and somewhere in that same rhythm, someone had been learning him right back. That afternoon, a new duty roster went up, and Ethan's name had been quietly shifted onto the same rotation as a guard he didn't recognize. Young, nervous, overly polite, in a way none of the veteran staff bothered with anymore. Loomis clocked it before Ethan finished reading the board. "That's Ferris. Started 2 weeks before you did. Nobody thought much of it until now." "Now? Now I remember he was the one who signed off on routine maintenance in the laundry wing 4 days before the gas line blew." Ethan didn't confront Ferris directly. He watched him instead, the way he used to watch a compound before deciding which door was actually the weak one, and noticed by evening that Ferris made a phone call from the staff lot that lasted 4 minutes and ended the second he saw another guard approaching. Kessler pulled Ferris's personnel file within the hour and found what she'd half expected, a signing bonus, 6 weeks before his start date, from a staffing agency that subcontracted exclusively for Meridian facilities. "He's not a mastermind," she told Ethan that night. "He's a low-level asset who got paid to report shift patterns. But he's proof the leak's internal, and proof Vance's reach didn't end when Priest disappeared. Then pull him in before he reports anything else." "I'm going to do better than that," Kessler said. "I'm going to let him keep reporting, just not the truth." Feeding Ferris false information meant staging Ethan's routine differently than his actual one. A decoy schedule leaked through casual conversation Ferris was meant to overhear. Real movements kept off any log he could access. It worked exactly as intended, and it very nearly got someone else killed instead. Rourke, still shadowing Ethan's real schedule out of what had become genuine, hard-earned loyalty, walked directly into the decoy timing, meant to draw out whoever Ferris reported to, and found himself alone in the exact corridor Priest's people had once used, at the exact hour Ethan was supposed to have been there. The attack came fast. 2 men, no hesitation, no interest in making it look like an accident this time. Rourke went down hard under the first strike. Radio knocked from his hand before he could call it in. Ethan reached the corridor 90 seconds later, alerted by Loomis's frantic signal, moving faster than his still-healing back wanted to allow. He took the first attacker from behind, controlled and brutal in the same instant. No room left for restraint when Rourke's blood was already on the floor. The second turned to run and made it 3 steps before Ethan closed the gap and put him down with a strike, aimed to disable, not punish. Rourke was breathing when the guards arrived. "Barely. He was hit going after you," Kessler said grimly, standing outside the infirmary where Rourke lay under observation, ribs wrapped, one eye swollen shut. "That's the second time your decoy plan put someone else in the crossfire instead of you." "He walked into it on his own," Ethan said, "because he finally started protecting people instead of controlling them. That's not on your plan. That's on the 6 weeks he spent being someone worth attacking in the first place." Kessler didn't argue the point. She simply nodded, once, and went back inside to update the file. Ferris was pulled from duty that night, quietly, without explanation to the block, exactly the way Kessler had planned it. What she hadn't planned was the message that arrived at the facility's front gate the next morning, addressed to no one by name, delivered by courier instead of mail. Inside, a single photograph of Tin's cell number and one typed line. "Witnesses who talk don't always make it to trial." Tin read it standing in the yard, hands steady in a way that surprised even him. "They're scared," he said, mostly to himself. "That's the only reason they'd threaten me directly, instead of just making me disappear quietly like they tried with Rourke." "Scared people escalate," Ethan said. "That's not comfort. That's a warning." Kessler moved Tin to protective isolation within the hour. Not punishment this time, but the same reinforced administrative wing that had briefly saved Ethan's life weeks earlier. It didn't stop the attempt. It only changed its shape. That night, An electrical fault in the isolation wing's ventilation system began pumping smoke. Thin, almost undetectable, timed for the hour staffing dropped to its minimum, into the sealed room where Tin slept, alone, no window, no working alarm. Loomis caught it by accident, smelling smoke on air that shouldn't have been circulating from that wing at all, and hit the manual alarm himself before any automated system registered a problem. Ethan reached the isolation wing seconds after the guards did, lungs already burning from the corridor's thickening haze, and found Tin unconscious on the floor, breathing shallow, seconds from a fault line no maintenance log would ever fully explain. They got him out. Barely. Carbon monoxide, the infirmary doctor said flatly, checking Tin's vitals for the third time in an hour. Concentration that high, in a sealed room, he had maybe 10 more minutes before it stopped being reversible. Kessler stood in the doorway, face carved from stone. That's not intimidation anymore. That's attempted murder of a federal witness inside a facility under active federal investigation. I don't need Griggs's cooperation to move on this. I have enough to move on Meridian's maintenance contract tonight. And Vance, Ethan said. Vance is smarter than a maintenance contract, Kessler said. He'll have insulated himself from every signature on every document that matters. But every attempt on Tin, on Rourke, on you, that's a pattern a jury doesn't need a paper trail to understand. Juries understand bodies. They understand near misses, stacking up, until stacking up is the whole story. Tin woke 2 hours later, groggy, furious in a way that had nothing left in it, of the boy who'd once slapped a stranger across the face, just to prove he could. They tried to gas me in my sleep, he rasped. In a room you people called safe. Nowhere in this building is safe, Ethan said quietly. It hasn't been since the day I walked in. I just didn't understand yet that it hadn't been safe for you either, for 6 years before that. Tin didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice had gone very quiet. I want to testify from a hospital bed, if that's what it takes. I want it on record before they get a third try. Kessler recorded Tin's full statement that night, IV line still taped to his arm, voice hoarse from smoke but steady through every question. His brother's death, Rourke's original report, 6 years of silence bought with fear, and finally, the maintenance patterns he'd learned secondhand from Rourke himself, patterns that traced every disabled camera in this block back to contracts signed by Meridian, funded, ultimately, by a name none of them had said out loud inside these walls until tonight. Vance, this is enough to move, Kessler said afterward, standing in the corridor with Ethan and Camille, exhaustion and something close to triumph, fighting for space on her face. Not to finish it, but to move hard, publicly, in a way Vance can't quietly bury the way he's buried everything else, for 11 years. Then move, Ethan said. Camille caught his arm before he turned back toward the block. You look like a man expecting this to get worse before it gets better. It's always gotten worse before it got better, Ethan said. Every single time since intake. I don't see why tonight would be different. He wasn't wrong to expect it. 2 floors above them, in an office Griggs no longer fully controlled, a phone rang once, twice, and was answered by a voice that hadn't been heard inside this facility in 3 weeks. They have Tin's statement, Priest said quietly into the receiver, watching the block through a window from a position no one had thought to check. And they're not going to stop looking now that they have it. A pause, listening. Understood, Priest said finally. Then it's time we made sure there's nothing left in that block worth testifying about. Infirmary's locked down, Loomis said, breathless, shaking Ethan awake in the dark. Somebody just badged in with clearance nobody's ever seen before. Tin still hooked up to monitors in there, Cross. Alone. Ethan was moving before Loomis finished the sentence. The corridor toward the infirmary sat unnaturally still. No guards at the checkpoint that should have had 2. A radio left on a desk still crackling with a diversion call Ethan recognized instantly. A stage disturbance on the far side of the block, pulling every available body away from exactly where it mattered. He reached the infirmary door as it hissed shut from the inside, lock engaging with the same too-clean sound he'd learned, over 6 brutal weeks, to fear more than any fist. Through the reinforced window, he saw it clearly. Priest, unhurried as ever, disconnecting Tin's monitor leads one at a time with the calm precision of a man finishing a checklist. Tin unconscious or sedated, unable to fight back. Ethan didn't wait for the door. He drove his shoulder into the emergency release panel beside it, overriding the lock the way he'd been trained to breach compromised rooms a lifetime ago, and the door gave with a shriek of metal. Priest turned, unsurprised. "Took you longer than I expected." "You were counting on that. I was counting on you caring more about him than about being smart," Priest said, stepping away from the bed, hands loose at his sides. "Convenient, really. Saves me a second trip." They didn't circle each other. Priest closed the distance immediately, a strike aimed at Ethan's ribs, the same ribs still healing from the storage corridor weeks earlier, and Ethan barely turned in time to take it on his forearm instead, pain lighting white behind his eyes. This wasn't Tin's clumsy first swing, or 2 hired hands in a shower stall. Priest moved like Ethan once had, every motion economical, trained, patient, the fight of a man who'd never once needed to hurry to win. Ethan gave ground twice, absorbing more than he landed, until his back found the edge of the supply cabinet and he understood, with total clarity, that retreating any further meant retreating past Tin's bed. He stopped retreating. The next exchange lasted 4 seconds and cost them both. Priest's elbow opened a cut above Ethan's eye. Ethan's counter dislocated Priest's shoulder with a controlled, brutal twist that should have ended it. It didn't. Priest kept coming, arm hanging useless, still moving with the same terrible calm, until Ethan finally abandoned restraint entirely, drove him back into the monitor stand hard enough to crack it, and pinned him to the floor with a hold that left no room left for either of them to negotiate. "0 shots fired," Priest rasped, blood on his teeth, something almost like respect in his voice. "Your file said that like it was a virtue. Funny how far you'll go without one when it's someone else's life on the line instead of your own." "It still is a virtue," Ethan said, voice shaking with effort, and something that wasn't quite triumph. "I didn't fire one now either." Guards flooded the room 40 seconds later, drawn by the noise Ethan had stopped trying to avoid the moment the fight began. Priest didn't resist the cuffs. Men like him never did, not out of surrender, but out of the same cold calculation that had governed every move he'd made since episode 11. "You'll be replaced," Priest said calmly, as they hauled him upright. "Someone always is. Maybe," Ethan said, kneeling beside Tin's bed to check the reconnected leads with hands that hadn't fully stopped shaking. "But not tonight, and not by you." The phone recovered from Priest's jacket took federal analysts 6 hours to crack, and what they found ended any question of deniability that had protected Holt Vance for 11 years. Encrypted call logs, wire authorizations for consulting fees that traced directly to contractor badges used in 3 separate attempts on Ethan's life, and a single message, sent the night of the fire, that read simply, "Contain it, whatever it costs." Kessler stood in Griggs's office one final time, this time with a warrant that made his cooperation irrelevant to whether the case moved forward at all. "We don't need you anymore," she told him, "but you can still decide whether you're a footnote in this or a co-defendant." Griggs signed everything she put in front of him. Rourke's testimony, recorded from his hospital bed 2 floors below Tin's, finally closed the last gap in the case. 6 years of falsified reports, camera outages logged, and dated back to the week after Tin's brother died, and a direct account of the phone call in which he'd first been told a contractor named Priest would be handling a new inmate named Ethan Cross, before Ethan had even finished intake processing. "They knew who I was before I signed the paperwork," Ethan said quietly, reading the transcript Camille brought him. "This was never really about a corridor fight or a camera pattern. It started before I ever walked in the door. It started 11 years before that," Camille said. The day you filed a concern about Clear River's supply manifests that somebody decided was worth burying a man alive to keep quiet. She met his eyes. Vance was arrested at his office this morning. Fraud, conspiracy, 3 counts of attempted murder, and accessory to Marcus Ilvis's death at Blackridge before he even opened this facility's contract. He's not walking away from any of it. The hearing to vacate Ethan's original conviction took 11 minutes, shorter in the end than a single conversation with Rourke in an equipment room had once taken to nearly cost him everything. The judge read it plainly. Conviction vacated in full, based on newly discovered evidence of witness tampering, falsified testimony, and a documented conspiracy to obstruct a lawful appeal. No conditions, no probation, no asterisk. Ethan didn't feel triumph hearing it. He felt something quieter, the specific, hollow relief of a weight finally set down after carrying it so long he'd forgotten what standing without it felt like. Tin, recovering in a hospital bed under armed protection, received his own hearing 2 weeks later, a reduced sentence for cooperation, with a parole date that would have been unthinkable 7 weeks earlier, before a bald stranger named Loomis first told a quiet new inmate not to flinch in the yard. "You didn't have to keep coming back for me," Tin told Ethan, the last time they spoke inside those walls. "Not after the shower, not after the fire, not after the infirmary. I gave you every reason to let it happen. You gave your brother's death a reason to matter," Ethan said. "That's not nothing, Tin. That's the only thing that was ever going to make any of this worth surviving." The gate rolled open at 7 a.m., mist still clinging to the yard behind him, and Ethan Cross walked out of the building that had tried, in more ways than he could fully count, to make sure he never would. Marin was waiting past the checkpoint, exactly where Camille had told him she'd be, and she didn't run this time. She simply walked, steady, the way she had at 11 years old learning to ride a bike he'd let go of a beat too early, trusting her own balance before she was fully sure of it. He folded his arms around her, the way he had imagined, in 100 sleepless nights inside a cell that had tried to convince him this moment would never come. "You kept your promise," she said quietly, into his shoulder. "Every day," he said, "even the ones that nearly cost me everything to keep it." Behind them, past the gate, the prison stood exactly as it had for decades, gray, unremarkable, indifferent to the 11 weeks that had just ended inside it. Somewhere in that building, Rourke was beginning a long process of testifying his way toward whatever reduced sentence his cooperation had earned him. Somewhere else, Tin was counting down a parole date he'd once believed he'd never live to see. And 3 states away, in a courtroom that would spend the next year unpacking exactly how far Holt Vance's reach had once extended, a system that had let all of it happen for 11 years, was finally, slowly, being forced to answer for it. Ethan didn't look back at any of it. He walked toward the car where Camille waited, Marin's hand still in his, carrying nothing out of that building except the one promise that had mattered enough to survive keeping. Holt Vance's sentencing took place 8 months later, in a courtroom 3 states away from the block, where all of it had nearly ended more than once. The jury took less than a day. Fraud, conspiracy, 3 counts of attempted murder, an accessory to the death of an inmate named Marcus Ilves, killed at Blackridge Correctional 11 months before Vance's company ever touched Ethan's facility. Life, without the possibility of parole. Vance showed no reaction when the judge read it. Men like him, Ethan had come to understand, rarely did, right up until the moment the silence around them finally became permanent. Meridian Corrections Group lost every contract it held within the year. 6 facilities across 4 states underwent federal review. 2 wardens were indicted alongside Griggs. The camera outage pattern that had once nearly gotten Ethan killed became, in the end, the single piece of evidence prosecutors returned to again and again. Proof that danger dressed up as maintenance logs could still be counted, and named, and stopped. Tin's parole hearing came 14 months after Ethan's release. Ethan sat in the gallery, uninvited but not turned away, and watched a man who'd once slapped a stranger across the face every morning stand in front of a board and describe, without flinching, exactly what 6 years of silence had cost him and everyone else in that block. The board granted it unanimously. Outside the hearing room, Tin found Ethan waiting by the entrance. "You didn't have to come. Your brother didn't get someone showing up for him," Ethan said. "Seemed like the least I could do for the one still standing." Tin didn't have anything to say to that for a while. When he finally spoke, it wasn't about the hearing. "I'm going to see him. This weekend. First time since the funeral I couldn't finish attending." "Good," Ethan said. "Go." Life afterward was quieter than Ethan had let himself imagine while it was happening. He didn't return to any version of military work, despite 2 separate offers that came through Kessler's office within the first year. He spent most mornings at a kitchen table with Marin before school, learning, slowly, how to be present for the ordinary parts of a life he'd nearly lost the right to have at all. Some evenings when the house went quiet, he still checked the windows twice before he could settle. Marin had stopped commenting on it months ago. She understood, in the specific way children who've almost lost a parent understand things, that some habits don't leave just because the danger finally has. He drove 3 hours alone on a gray Saturday in early spring, to a cemetery he'd never visited and a man he'd never met. Marcus Ilves's grave sat near the back, modest, a little overgrown at the edges, the way graves get when the people who should be tending them have run out of ways to carry the grief. 29 years old. A single line beneath the dates, chosen by a family that had fought for years to have the official cause of death amended, and finally, 3 months ago, succeeded. Taken too soon. Never forgotten. Ethan stood there a long time, hands in his coat pockets, the wind moving through bare branches overhead. "You were first," he said finally, quietly, to no one who could answer. "Before Tin's brother. Before me. Before all of it got big enough that people who should have been protecting you decided you were cheaper to bury than to believe." He crouched, brushed a few fallen leaves from the base of the headstone, the same careful, deliberate motion he used for anything that mattered. "It doesn't fix what happened to you," he said. "Nothing does. But it doesn't happen again. Not in that building, not under that company, not to the next name they might have picked instead of yours, if this had gone on any longer." He stood, looked at the grave a moment longer, and said the only thing left that felt true. "You're the reason any of us knew where to start looking. I hope that counts for something, wherever you are." Then he walked back to the car, where Marin was waiting in the passenger seat, patient in the way she'd learned to be over the last year, and drove them both home, not toward anything he was running from anymore, but simply toward the life he'd promised her. Through a pane of prison glass, he would find a way back to. He had kept that promise, every day, even the ones that had nearly cost him everything to keep it. Up next, you'll see 2 more incredible stories waiting for you on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, tap to watch another. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Before you go, drop your city or country in the comments. I'd love to see where you're watching from.